everybody. So this is a different take on our webinar that I thought we'd incorporate for a few this year. And I've asked a few friends and special guests to come along and do some of these with me. I think it's kind of important. So the topic today, and as many of you know already, Jim picks these topics pretty randomly sometimes. So he just makes up a title and gives it to me, and I got to try to figure out how to make it work, which sometimes is challenging. So I said to Jim in the beginning of the year when we were going through or last year when we were going through the calendar, I said, you know, Jim, I enjoy doing the webinars, but I feel like it's a little repetitive and I'm trying to think of different ways. And the truth of it is I felt like what I really wanted to show was what we really do. And I wanted to show some partners and how I work. So one of my partners and clinicians that I work with is Dr. Bernadette Sava. Welcome.
And we are actually in our office.
Yeah, and actually I'm in a different office today, so I'll go through that in a second. Also, Dr. Mike Ricciardi is here. He might be popping in and out on the screen. Mike and I have actually lectured together over the years, and I think he's done some webinars too. And Bernadette and I have done a few things together. So we kind of wanted to share really in a simple way what we do. And that was really kind of the goal. So I think most of you realize I'm not in my normal office when you see me doing the webinars. I'm actually in Dr. Bernadette's office today. And in the office here, I spend a good amount of time here, I'd say. I come back and forth, and she spends a good amount of time in my office. I mean, I think
just 10 minutes away, so that helps.
Yeah, being that we're close, I think really makes it so nice. I mean, you know, as a technician, I'm lucky that I can work with doctors all around the world. And yes, we have FaceTime and Zoom, but honestly, this is kind of the best, right? Where you popped into the lab last night for an hour and went through a case or two. And I think we get so busy sometimes. We used to be able to spend a lot more time, and now we're kind of like, all right, just this case. And next week we'll talk about this one. Or
sometimes we FaceTime, sometimes we just exchange pictures, and sometimes we meet in person and do a lot more discussions.
Yeah, and I like the person the best. I feel like that's the best. So anyway, we're in Bernadette's office. You can see her staff up here on the screen, and she's built a beautiful office here. So today we're kind of combining the two offices to work together. And the importance of our topic was really about how we work together. And in the end, I think from a technician point of view, I know a lot of times I talk about all these things, right? The details, the surface texture, the topography, the embrasure spaces, you know, all the things. But in truth, in order for us to work well together, it really becomes about this, right? What happens when we put our cases into oral? And did all our planning work out? And that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today, is how we plan through our cases. Before we get too far into it, I'll just throw out that obviously if I'm working with a brush or a mouse, and if I'm using, you know, manual or digital, it's still the same processes. So the processes we're going to go through aren't really changing for digital or analog. They're really just a process that we go through. And that's the same in Dr. Bernadette's office, is whether she's using a scanner or physical impressions, which she still does a lot of, our system is the same. We kind of wanted to break the system down for you a little bit. So we break it down by talking about the face, the white, and the pink, which I think is really the fun stuff of what we do.
Yeah, so after we collect all the information, I meet with Peter and we review the cast, we review the face, we review all the photos, and we come up with different options for patients. And I meet the patients again and review or whatever we feel like it will be a good options for patients. So we're trying to gather all in the information first. My initial exam is always photographs, x-rays, and scans now more than regular impressions. And then I sit with Peter and we review. He tells me what he sees from his ceramist point of view, and I tell him a little bit more about my patient, because knowing who the patient is really more important than anything else. And sometimes I actually want him to meet my patient, because some patients can be challenging, and I want him to know who he's dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I see a good amount of your patients. I feel like I probably see 60, 70% of them, I think, at this point. And whether it's coming here or them coming to my office, it's kind of funny, because I think somebody asked me a while ago about photography. They're like, do you still take all the pictures? And years ago, I did. But if you see behind me, Dr. Bernadette has the exact same camera that I has, takes pictures just as well as I do. And that's kind of changed the process. But what we didn't realize by changing that process was I started to lose the interaction with the patient.
Yeah.
So even though she's taking all the photos, she still sends patients to my office sometimes, because that part is invaluable, that we can actually meet with a patient and understand what they're thinking and how they feel and who they are, right? Because let's be honest, some of them are the sweetest people in the world who just want to get something fixed, and some of them are a little crazy, have a lot more demands.
And I need them to know.
Yeah, and we need to know that ahead of time.
Their personalities and their expectations.
So this article was, I'm not going to read the whole article for you. I'm just going to say that this was an interesting article I read recently, the influence of facial features and how we perceive them. I'm just going to highlight one first sentence of the article. It says, facial information is processed by our brain in such a way that we immediately make judgments about. For example, you see somebody who's attractive or masculine looking or feminine looking, how you interpret their personality traits based on what you see, and the appearance of each facial feature has an effect on the perception of our facial traits. What does that really mean? Well, let's be honest. How many times do you see a patient, or you see a person, I should say, it's not a patient, in the street and they're wearing a denture and your brain automatically knows. Your brain can kind of detect what's right and wrong. I think part of what we're trying to do is eliminate that. What we want people to do when we're done is, we worked on Mrs. Smith together, and we want Mrs. Smith to walk out into the world and everybody says, Miss Smith, you look wonderful. What have you done? We don't want it to be, oh, who made those teeth for you? Why? Oh, they're so bright. They're so this, they're so that. So we're trying to incorporate nature into what we do. And to do that, we have to really look at the face, right? So the face has a lot of details to it. I get a little frustrated because I think, school systems, and I think you kind of used to explain this to me more when we talked about Bernadette's a prosthodontist, by the way, Dr. Bernadette. So her level of schooling is impressive, but it's the work that went in after, because in the dental schools today, they're teaching a lot about symmetry and facial features, but they're not really diving into what I would say is proper today. I think there's a lot more to it than that. Right? For an example, the face is not symmetrical. And
we have dominant side and non-dominant side, and obviously we still don't utilize that. Denture companies are not making us different sets, different side, one from another. We used to have, we have to make everything a little bit more unique by modifying some angles or shapes of the teeth in order to make one side look a little bit more dominant, that fits that side in comparison to the other side that is a little bit less dominant. So it takes a person to kind of really pay attention to the face and figure out what really fits that patient, modify it so that it doesn't look like a denture. It looks unique.
Yeah, I think denture is a kind of a private joke we have all the time, right? Because I always say, I don't want the case to look like a denture at the end. We want symmetry. We want the teeth to have a nice flow and similar looks to them, of course. We don't want it to look so fake that it looks like a denture. And by the way, when we make dentures, I think we try the same thing. We try to modify and tweak and do all those things. So the goal here is to fit the face. I will say that the face has changed. When you were in school, I would imagine there were 3 face types, right? It was not that you're that old, but I mean,
triangular.
Yeah, square, triangular, and oval, right? Those are the 3 faces. Well, today in the year 2024, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 of them there already. And there's probably more than that. There's so many different facial types. We're a global world, right? There's, people that have married from different countries and different races. And now it's really changing how we see the face.
Cosmetic modifications. A lot of people are doing Botox fillers. Things have changed.
A lot, or everyone. I don't see a patient anymore that I'm like, filler. So yes, that's making it harder for us, though, not easier.
Exactly.
Because now their lip dynamic is different, and we'll cover that as we go through. So what we're really saying is the face is not symmetrical. Our job is to find out the flaws or the pros and cons, and let me be clear and say, I think the attractive face is not symmetrical. I think what makes faces attractive are all those little details in faces, right? So we can't just say the interpupillary line is perfect, every level of the face is perfect, every this is perfect, because they're not. And we want to be able to fit what we do into that face. So let's dive into this a little bit. Let me be clear that no matter what we're doing, whether it's simple veneers, a crazy implant case, single units, whatever it is that we're trying to achieve, we're going to treat it the same. I think the only time we probably don't is maybe a single tooth, right? Maybe a single molar or a single central or a single lateral is the only time that we're not going, into everything that we're going to cover today. But realistically, every other case, we are. So let's cover some of the quick basics. What are aesthetics? So when we talk about aesthetics, where are we starting?
Well, we're starting with the face, and we evaluate the feature, and we obviously have to take lip dynamics into consideration. Some people have very symmetrical lips and the way they move, whether it's hypermobile lip or not. We have to take that into consideration for certain procedures. But we really start with incisor edge position. That's our, initial standard.
Yeah.
Where's our starting point? That's incisor edge position. We talk about the shapes and texture of the teeth.
In essence, yeah, those are all our basics for the aesthetic essentials that we're looking for. And it gets a little bit more involved as we go on, right? In the sense that we also want to evaluate, is there functional stresses? Is there constriction in the arch? Is there some sort of interferences? Is there an envelope issue? Or is it a brain issue, right? And we kind of talked about, I'm meeting patients sometimes because sometimes they're very demanding and we can't control everything they want. But also when it comes to occlusion and functional stresses, we also can't control all that because there is a small percentage of patients who we say it sounds cold, I guess, but it's wiring issues, right? It's probably the better way to say it. It's how the brain reacts to the teeth. It's not how the teeth are reacting to the brain. So when we're in those situations, it's going to make our job much more challenging to kind of work our way through. Also, materials. So we have to go through all the materials that we want. We're thinking about, is ortho necessary so we can move teeth around? Can Dr. Bernadette stay where she's minimally prepping teeth? Whether patient's age might have a factor in that, right? If we're working on a 25-year-old as compared to an 85-year-old, we might be thinking differently. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to be willy-nilly with dentistry. It just means that if we're replacing 2 teeth on an 85-year-old patient, I would assume you're not terrified to prep a full coverage restoration, or you wouldn't be thinking, I have to move these teeth to save the enamel. You're thinking more that what's most effective to manage the health of this patient.
Again, knowing who is your patient really is the most important, whether the patient has risks for functional risks, aesthetic risks, caries risk, or periodontal risks. And those will be different approaches to those patients and different maintenance in the future. So for me, it's always like figuring out who is the patient that I'm dealing with. And then that's how we sometimes create treatment plans. We're not going to, on a caries patient, an older patient, we're not going to do like a conservative veneers, because if there are cervical exposures, this patient will get recurrent caries really quickly. So different type of patient, different risks will kind of probably dictate the treatment plan.
You said a key word there that triggered a thought in my brain. You said it carries risk, right? So in today's world where everything is about minimally invasive dentistry, and I get it, we should prep less teeth and save more structure. But when there is caries risk, should you, right? Right away you're thinking, I should be full coverage because this patient is pertinent to caries. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, without thinking through it all,
make the patient realize what the risks are, what will happen in the future when we do just a minimal restoration versus a full coverage.
And it doesn't mean we're opposed to minimal. Of course we want to do a minimal if we can.
But even with full coverage claims, they're still at risk if you don't make them realize that this is going to continue, if they're not going to do something about it. And we have to put them on a kind of different maintenance and different follow-ups.
Yeah, so I think it's important. And again, we're just trying to show you the insights. And the only thing that really ever changes, I think, is when the implant comes in. And I can make the argument that it doesn't really change. Realistically, we're still thinking all the exact same things. So if we're talking about restoring teeth, either minimally or fully invasive, or we're talking about restoring the teeth on implant structures, our process isn't changing. It's still about where the incisal edge belongs. It's still about what the face looks like. The only thing that we're going to add into that is, one, we want retrievability, right? Most restorations we're trying to cement permanently or bond in so they don't ever come out. This is the opposite. We want to be able to have access to these restorations. And then also we want to make sure that sometimes the lip dynamic and support, which we'll touch on, is a little different. We might need more bony architecture replaced besides for just replacing the teeth. So there's a little more extra cavity in there. But in the end, really the only difference between implant restorative and normal restorative is these things. We want to have a little bit more retrievability, and if it's minimally invasive or fully invasive, we want more bondability, right? And I think that's the best way to kind of sum those two up. Okay, so here's what we do, and I think this is kind of the secret in the mix, right? This is the secret ingredient.
I love dentures, and I know I'm being made fun of, but I think denture is, to me, if you understand dentures, you understand aesthetics. And it begins with the face and the position of the teeth. You have to figure out, it's a little harder, but you have to figure out where to start. And you start again with incisal edge position, with the horizontal plane, vertical dimension, lip support, and all that stuff that we just discussed. But once you know the dentures and you actually incorporate face with the setup, and I love to actually set up my own first 6 teeth, so I can evaluate patient speaking space and incisal edge position in motion, and then I communicate with Peter.
Oh, no, she dictates.
No, I dictate.
That's what she meant. That wasn't a Freudian slip. She meant dictates.
We communicate more after.
Yeah, and I think the secret sauce here is, and what you're saying is right? Setting up a denture is fun because there's so much involved in it. But what I kind of throw in there is, isn't every case kind of a denture case, right?
Absolutely.
I don't care if you're doing minimally invasive veneers, it's a denture case in my mind, because the goal is still the same. And the goal is kind of simple. That is, where do the teeth belong in that face? So we've looked at that face, we've looked at dominant and non-dominant, the pupillary lines, the lip dynamics, all the things that we incorporate normally. But in the end, what does it come down to? Where does the incisal edge belong in that face? And once we've kind of made that decision, then it starts to become a lot easier. And that decision is made in denture world, in minimally invasive crown and bridge world, in full coverage restorative. It's the same thing for us across the board. Dr. Mike just walked in the room, so he can join us on camera if he wants. Once we have the incisal edge position, we already announced you, so welcome. Once we have that incisal edge position, it really becomes about the horizontal plane. And then I think the common sense here, I always say to people, if you know where your incisal edge is, what's the average length of the central? About 10 millimeters, which means what? You now know where your gingival architecture belongs. So it really sets it up for us very nicely to have that information. And once we've done that, then we can start talking about OBD and the lower incisal position and the functional planes and all those things. But realistically, we're adamant in starting in that incisal edge position across the board. So for all of us, it's kind of the same. What does the face look like? Where does the white belong? And then third part is, how do we support the pink? And that's going to be either by the material choice that we make or by building pink if we really need to as we go through the process. So again, think like a denture is kind of the key phrase for us all the time. When we're working with space, this is where it becomes more challenging, right? So I don't know, Mike, if you want to join in with us, Dr. Ricciardi is here working today too, so it's kind of nice to have a team here together. We're talking about all the features of the face we kind of went through, and now we're summing up into how we're going to start to manage the space with the white and pink. So if you want to join in, you can. So don't feel like you have to. Okay, so I'll keep going. I could ramble on, so you guys got to cut in. It's going to be what's going to happen. I'll just keep rambling.
You made the presentation, so you know what's in the presentation.
I'll just keep rambling. You know how that works. So look, simplicity. When we're dealing with 8, 10, 12 millimeters of space, we kind of know what we're doing, right? Now the question becomes, what material should we use? Age of the patient, minimally invasive, not minimally invasive, carries risk, all the things that we just talked about. But it's not always the case. Sometimes there's more space to fill, right? Sometimes there's pink that's not being supportive, or the bony architecture doesn't support what we want. So in prosthodontic world, they've broken this down as FP1, 2, and 3. And why don't you explain the prosthodontic terms for us, FP1, 2, and 3?
Well, so FP1 is just we replace it just the white of the tooth, so the bone is at the right level. In FP2, there's some pink expected, so it could be just papilla, or maybe up to 2 millimeters, from what I remember. And FP3, there's going to be quite a lot of pink to be replaced. So most of those cases will be perio patients.
Yeah, so I sometimes argue on the 2 that I think textbook-wise, I think they said possibly 1 millimeter. I find FP2 is a little awkward because it's that in-between spot where you don't know, should we add that little pink or should we not add the pink? Because once we add pink sometimes, especially on crown and bridge and restorative, now we're thinking hygiene. How do we manage from a cleansability point of view? So I think FP1 and FP3 are really kind of a very simple path. That FP2, I think, is a problem for us because now it's changing how we view.
And the biotype of the patient, how you extract tooth, whether you create ovate parentex to begin with. You know what I mean? If you don't do immediate load and transition from teeth to implants and you don't recreate that ovate features, then it's really difficult to regain on a flat ridge that architecture that we are looking for.
Yeah, so that's why I say FP2 is kind of like a big question mark sometimes because it's really not as simple as 1 and 3.
But I would always tell the patient that there will be some pink required.
Yeah, and
to let them know, because some patients' expectations are to the point where they don't want any replacement or because they feel like it's not going to look natural.
And I would argue it's very difficult to make the pink look natural, especially in small areas, right? If I'm making pink in the laboratory and I'm doing an entire arch of pink, no problem. I have freedom to do a lot. But when I have to do, it's funny, for years I think I taught and I said a single central was the hardest thing we did. And I was wrong. A single central is like 3rd on the list today. The hardest thing we do is matching pink in 1 or 2 small areas. That's the most challenging. The second for me is doing congenitally missing laterals. That's the second hardest. Why? Because you have 2 different sides of the face and 2 different color schemes. And then the third becomes the single central, I think, or the implant single central. So we look at the space that we have and we have to really figure out what our restorative options are for the cases that we work. And during that process, as we're examining the face, we're really going through the lip dynamics of the patients. There are 3 basic lip type dynamics. There's the vertical maxillary excess, which I think we always joke and say is your worst nightmare of a patient. These are the really most challenging patients because not only do we have to make the white look great, but we have to make the transition between that white and pink so much better. Although we try to do that anyway, right? Even if the patient is brachiofacial, like me, who doesn't really show teeth, we still want to make sure that white-pink transition is perfect. So we're not going to skimp and say, oh, their lip doesn't move, so who cares, right? I mean, it's not going to happen.
We still want to make the proportions proper and the transition to be as nice as possible because people do lift the lips.
Yeah, and we always joke and say, when you're uncomfortable in your teeth, you tend to be more brachiofacial. And when you've had a few drinks in you and you're not thinking about it, right, then your lip kind of really gets up there and you're laughing a little bit different. Here's the good and bad news for you. Most of the people that we work on, the dental facial people, are about what you see here. Some of them show 1.2, some show 10 millimeters. And this is about 70% of our population. These people are about 15 and 15. So about 15% is vertical maxillary excess, and 15 is about brachiofacial, where they don't show much. But we're staying with the plan, right? We're sticking the same way all the way across the board. So what does that mean for us? It means when we're restoring teeth, we're still thinking, even though the patient may not show that, we're still thinking, what about the papillas? How do we support them? What material do we need? What's the aesthetic parameters that we're working in? And how can we protect that tooth down the line? And if they show more, we're still thinking the same. We're not really changing the thought. So I think our mandate is do the best you can now and don't let some of the factors deter you from where you're going. Would probably be a good way to say that, right? Because it'll be easy. They don't show teeth. Don't worry about it. Get the inside of the ledge right. But we're not really doing that. Okay, so in the end, if you have 100% of a tooth, normally the pink is about 35 to 45% of the tooth. There are lots of studies and articles on this, and I won't get into all of them, but in the end, the bottom line is we want to make sure we're supporting that pink architecture as best we can, and we want to understand where the papillas belong from tooth to tooth to tooth. This was from an article, I think, from Dennis and Stephen Chu and Dennis Tarnow did this article a bunch of years ago. It's a great article on mesial and distal papilla height, so it was actually really interesting. But in the end, the determination was the same. It's always 35 to 40% of where the tooth structure should be. It just changes a little bit from angle to angle.
You mean the role of where the bone is to the contact?
Yeah, so I think that's where it started from, right? But I think then the evaluation was when you're managing gingival aesthetics and ceramics. I think that's where the secondary part came from. You're talking about biological width of bone.
Well, let's say you have an implant and you deliver a crown, you're expected to get some of the tissue growth, but if the bone is not supporting it, you can only get up to, Coase says 4 millimeters, Tarnow says 5. So I would say 4.5 would be
4.5 is we're neutral, like Switzerland.
So I always tell patients that they can expect that tissue to grow, and I measure it before Peter finishes the crown. Otherwise, I ask him for a little bit longer contact.
Yeah, and that's, again, see, that's exactly the point, is how we start to communicate through that process.
And that comes out in a provisional too.
It does, and I think that's a step that I would argue a lot of people skip.
And it shouldn't be, especially in anterior.
Yeah, I see it all too often where, you want to go from step A to step Z, and skipping some of those steps and not managing the tissue can come back and really cause some failure.
And it becomes an excuse.
So we started with the incisal edge position, the horizontal plane. You already get that. We're kind of recapping, and then let's get into a case. So this is Jack.
This is Jack.
And Jack's a wonderful guy. Why don't you tell us about Jack a little bit, if you don't mind?
Jack has presented to me before COVID. He was partially dentulous, and he wanted to obviously feel more confident and feel better about himself. And he decided to finally invest in his smile. And this is a combination case. And as I said before, I always look at patients and I figure out who is this patient, what will the risks be. This patient has perio as well as structural damages, but it's because he was wearing a partial for a very long period of time. And Peter will show the next slide. Those partials were ill-fitting. So some of these caries are due to ill-fitting partials, and the perio is in his family. So I knew that perio will be continuing in his future. So I have to look out for that when it comes to maintenance. And it affected his aesthetics. But again, I look at his face and I look at his incisor edge position. I already have some idea, but the midline is off. So when we start planning for the case, it's obvious that because he's unilaterally edentulous, it's best to give up some of the teeth that are still okay, semi-okay, but they're kind of in my way of the treatment for the whole face. And some doctors would choose maybe to do maxilla and leave the lower to do in the future. I don't agree with that kind of treatment, but because that determines my tooth position and occlusion. So I treat those two cases together. I treat maxilla and mandible at the same time. Even if I just do upper implants, the lower gets immediate denture. I don't want these super erupted teeth dictate my occlusal scheme and where the implant position will be, because that determines the interocclusal space, which kind of is very important. Once the implants are in the bone, we can take them out. I don't want to be in trouble and say, oh my God, I don't have interocclusal space for a future bridge. So we always have to take that into consideration. So that's why I always treat both arches at the same time.
So I think you made a really great point, right? And we've adamantly said twice or 3 or 4 times already, we start everything with that incisal edge position. And some of you are probably thinking, well, if they started with the incisal edge position, how do they know it's going to be okay later on? And the answer is we don't, right? Because we're dictating the aesthetic position, but we know we're going to have to do something to make it work. And that something could be a multitude of things. It could be orthodontics, it could be tooth removal, it could be restorative options, it could be partial dentures, there could be a million options. But what we're trying to figure out first is where do the aesthetics start.
Right, so I actually transitioned him from, I treated his upper first. I gave him nice, immediately loaded provisionals.
Well, before you get there.
But the lower was just an immediate denture.
Before you get there, just so we're on the same page, just look at his face. And I should have drawn some lines. I'm sorry. This is what happens when you put programs together at 2 o'clock in the morning. But look at his interpupillary line. You can see it's not perfectly straight. Look at his non-dominant side of his face, which is his right side.
He's deviated.
His left side is dominant, and the nose cants heavy to the left, right? So all these things are starting to play in factor. And also you can kind of tell where he's lacking bony structure, right? You can kind of see how
the left side is
you see teeth collapsed here, and you can see that there's better support. You see no teeth here, and there's a lack of support. So those are all the things that we're kind of starting to do. And no matter what the restorative is going to be, you're still thinking denture, right? Like, we don't know if it's going to be dentures or implant retained or individual bridges and all on. We don't really know at this point, but we do know where do we want to put those teeth in his face. So we go through the same process over and over again. It's kind of really repetitive for us. And now you could start getting into what you were saying. I didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to make sure we covered that one part.
To me, it's obvious. You see the ill-fitting partials and what it did to his lower incisors. You can finalize upper restorations without addressing how bad the lower plane is.
But I do like that one tooth right in the middle of his face. That one looks pretty good there, right? Crazy, right? How everything.
So paying attention to the entire face, the lips surrounding it. I guess the profile, have a picture of a profile, him speaking, where he's hitting the teeth. It's really what helps us figure out where the teeth belong, even for provisionals.
And that's where we wound up going. So in this case, you decided that most of the teeth, I'll go back to that slide, most of the teeth he had were not worth saving because of the perio. They were hopeless teeth, so he only had a few left here that they were gone. And I guess the perio here was bad enough that there was really nothing really to save. So you made a decision about implants, and part of that decision was how many? Do we want to do 8 implants and make 3 unit bridges? Do we want to do it as an all-on case? And that's where the communication starts to really come in for us. What are we thinking about is the best restorative option for him?
Yes, so because he's a perio patient, he didn't destroy his teeth. I don't really see that much wear, that much structural damage. He's not the functional patient. I'm thinking it would be safe to place 4 implants in the maxilla and the mandible and just have some nice fixed restorations for him. That is still feasible due to his financial also issues, but I think we felt like it was the right thing for him.
Can we classify this as a minimally invasive implant? Right? Like, we talk about minimally invasive dentistry where we're not prepping teeth, right? What about implants when you're only placing 4 instead of 8 or 12?
If it was a more functional patient, I would maybe place 6 or 8, but he's not. He's a perio
kind of
patient.
What I was getting into, right?
And I don't have to over-engineer a case like that. It's a really good spread. And we felt like 4 would be enough for him.
Yeah, and that's kind of my point, right? I'm joking and calling it minimally invasive, but the point I'm making is we're always trying to save tooth structure. I get it. But also, aren't we trying to keep the case as simple as we can? And because it wasn't a functional concern, the periodontal concerns, less is more in this case. We didn't need to have 8 implants. And by the way, expense, right? Every patient has a financial construction that they can go through. So we do all the normal things, right? Implants placed. Dr. Sava takes her impressions. We do an implant verification jig, a custom tray for that. And then after that, it really comes down to exactly what we did. And I don't think I have a photo of this, but I believe we did an old school wax rim, and you set a few teeth on him from what I remember, just to kind of get an idea of where we were going. And she did that here in the chair. So at least it gives me a photograph and some information to kind of start. From there, I did a wax up, and in the wax up, I almost felt like at this point we were in that in-between land of FP1, FP2, and 3, meaning that it definitely is not one. Did it need to be 3? And I wasn't sure. So I wound up kind of doing the wax up without it. And after we got the wax up set up, after starting to look at the length of the teeth, I think it kind of became clear that we're kind of drifting into FD3 world.
But look how imperfect your setup is. Can you see, like, the right side is a little higher than the left?
Yep.
The lower is a
Oh,
little
so this
bit
is about
uneven.
critiquing me now, huh?
No,
Okay.
but like, imagine doing that without a picture. Like, how would I
No,
communicate
100%.
with you? This is my son's school. 1 second.
100%. I think that's kind of the importance here is that we're trying to figure it out, right? And the beauty of it is that we're not perfect, and we don't think we are. And I think Dr. Saba makes a great point here in the sense that as we're getting that incised ledge position, things could not be right. And it's funny because I think it's a great point that you just made. He already was fairly supportive on the right side, but he was not supportive on the left. Well, if you look at my initial wax up of the supportiveness, you can see that I wasn't really getting the support that I needed. I actually needed to bring teeth out a little bit more here. And by the way, as I'm doing that, I'm really starting to think that this is 100% an FP3 case. There's not even a question about it anymore, because we don't just need some pink for aesthetics, but we really need the bony architecture and support here as we go on. Everything okay? So it's okay.
He fell in school.
Oh, is he right?
Yeah, he's in the nurse's office.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So in the end, based on, I was harnessing your point, right? And it's a great point because I already knew that he was supportive here, but I knew he was weak here. So when we did our initial wax up, the mistake was we really, I was pushing. You could see how much bulkier these are, but it wasn't enough. And because of that, it was the click of 100%, this is FP3. There's not even a question anymore. Yeah. If we can get away with keeping it more cleansable and hygienic.
Because with the length of the teeth, there's no way he can put his floss or water pick under that.
Not going to happen, right. So in the end, we wound up doing this as a setup. And you can see that as soon as we did the setup, we tried to get a little bit more support on this side by bringing that out. I think you see it probably better in here. I would argue could have come out a little bit more, maybe, right? But we don't want to create too much of a ridge lap either, so we're balancing those two things out. We did a digital design on the bar here, so after the setup is done, the bar is designed digitally. We treated this as a Toronto bridge, Toronto case.
With VITA teeth?
With VITA teeth, yes, and I think Pantera milled the bar for me. And in the end, the setup was done and it looked nice and clean. And I try to do a little extra in the setup, meaning that even with VITA teeth or whatever teeth I was using, I might sandblast and add a little color or chroma somewhere or put a check line in or something to make it look a little bit more realistic sometimes. And that's for the right patient. Some patients would rather just look nice, plain and white and clean. And in the end, our Jack finished up very nicely. The case was great.
And it's been a while, and I have to say, he hasn't broken or chipped anything. These are
knock on wood now, hold on.
No, Peter, for sure, I swear. So if this was a functional patient, maybe zirconia would have been a better choice, but he wasn't. Because I don't want to even, I don't want to deal with even chipping.
No, I'm with you. But I think, listen, let's have that conversation because I think that's important, right? Your choice that he's not a functional concern and knocking on wood that he hasn't knocked a tooth off, but he could knock a tooth off, right?
Yes.
We understand that. And if he can, what would we do?
Replace it. Easy.
It's an easy fix, right?
I save the tabs and I save the company of the teeth for every single patient. I always have a double just in case, and I can always repair this in one day. But
had we got another material,
I
what would
knew
happen?
that he's not gonna do that because he hasn't destroyed his teeth.
You better knock on some wood. You know they're not because you're jinxing us now.
No, I think it was predicted that he won't.
I agree. He's a great case for it. But what I'm kind of harnessing is I think a lot of people are treating these as these all-ons, especially with zirconia. Right? And for me, I find that problematic. It doesn't mean we never do it. We make some of those cases.
Basically.
But I think part of the problem is if this was a zirconia case and there was a functional concern, if the zirconia breaks or chips, now what do you do? And now the answer is you're starting over again, right? It's not like you have a repairability. So I guess the point I'm trying to make that I think is important is for some reason dentistry has pushed its members to think that whatever you restore has to last the patient an entire lifetime. And I don't think that's the case. I think what we really do has to last the patient as long as possible, but has to have the ability to be repaired and retreated. So would I rather do a minimally invasive veneer that breaks and 10 years later I have to do another one, or you turn it into a full coverage crown right away and then it breaks 10 years down the road, now what do you do?
Yeah,
Right,
and
so-
no implant and all that
Right, so
domino effect.
we're trying to protect that across the board. Let's look at one more case, because this case is more crown and bridge oriented.
Another patient that came to us right after COVID, he
Yes.
still has a mask on.
Oh yeah, that's right, he's wearing the mask down there, I didn't realize that.
But as you can see, he is
I thought he just robbed the bank and he was coming to us afterwards.
how I would define him. He's more of an aesthetic patient. When I look at x-rays, he doesn't have in his presentation low risk for caries, slight risk for function, you will see in just a moment, and just really cosmetic case. It's aesthetic case, which we can manage.
And he's young.
And he's young. 20s,
right? I think early 20s, mid 20s.
Yes.
Yeah, so he's a young
24,
patient.
25.
Okay. So there's a lot going on there. And
he had some enamel defects, and all his life he had to deal with all these discolorations, yellow spots, and some dentists already tried to cover some of those discolorations, especially because he already had gone through one round of ortho, and you can see some bandings that are breaking down in the anterior region. But the moment I sent this picture to Peter, I'm like, oh, I have another veneer case that was referred to me. And the moment he looked at number 7 and how the notch falls into the lower incisor, he was like, hello.
not a veneer case.
We have no space here.
Yeah.
So I requested if he could go back again to the orthodontist to intrude the lower anteriors, because as you can see in his face, his lower anteriors are very long. This face is a little bit more than I would want that. And I don't want to prep his teeth. So the more movement is done, it's more conservative for us as the doctors who prep the teeth for veneers. So he was okay with that. He understood, and he went back to the orthodontist to create some overjet and a little bit more function.
Before I move on to that, I wanted to and this is really why I wanted to do this, right? I wanted to have this kind of team event because patients presenting to you, and what we forget as laboratories, I know there's a good amount of technicians watching right now, what we forget is it's really easy to say what's wrong. I don't like this. This is not a good veneer case. But what we have to realize is she now has to...
You pointed it out, which I appreciate, because sometimes a lot of dentists are treatment planning the moment they meet the patient, and which is wrong, because there are some things that you will not pick up until you evaluate the patient's x-rays, pictures, and speak to the ceramist.
I pointed it out, but I put you in a bad spot, right, in essence, because think of what she said. The patient was already in ortho. They're coming to you because of discoloration that they don't like. Now when they come to you, what are you telling them? I got to put you back in ortho, right? And that's kind of a problematic spot to be in, because he already went through 2-3 years of ortho. He doesn't want to do it again, but now think about what we have to do.
That was a while ago.
No, I know, but think about, I guess what I'm trying to say is in fairness.
I always say that it relapsed, probably moved. I'm sure it was done better.
Well, I'm not blaming the original ortho. What I'm pinpointing is the simple fix that they think they came for has gotten more complicated, and you have to hold your ground, right? It's easy for you to say, oh, you don't want to do the ortho? Okay, we'll work around it. But in the end, you can't, right? You have to kind of have that line.
You kind of said there's no way.
Well, we said, I think we, you know.
No, we both agreed. That's why when I believe that something is the right thing to do, when I present it to the patients, they never say no. They really never say no.
I think the believe word is the important word, right? If you believe in it as you're selling it.
Because it's a young person, and he lives in Manhattan and I'm in Staten Island. Imagine getting a phone call every few months, my veneer popped off. Like, I don't want to hear from patients. So you have to do the right thing from the beginning, even if it takes a little bit longer, but you can sleep at night when things are done proper way. And it didn't take that much, really. It took only maybe 4 months for the
I think you could have, I mean, you did it bracket-wise, so the brackets are a lot quicker than like an Invisalign or
in some
trays.
orthodontist hands, it's much faster than Invisalign.
So it was great. So he was more than willing to go through the movements. And I think you see he's got an interesting lip dynamic, right? He actually shows way more in this area than he actually shows here.
Very asymmetrical.
Yeah, so again, there's a lot going on. And just for the fun of it, if you wanted to look at his face, you could see that he's a little bit more dominant on his right. You can see the interpupillary line goes here. His nose is pretty straight, but look, a slight cant to that direction.
But imagine like describing that without a picture.
You couldn't. It would be impossible. And I mentioned the nose, and you mentioned it once or twice before. Why am I saying that? Because in the end, of course, I want to make my midline straight. That's the goal. But what I can't do is go against the grain, meaning that if his nose tilts that way, my midline has to be either perfectly straight or it can lean slightly in that direction. It can't go against it. The minute it goes against it, that's when it looks fake and looks really bad. So we got to kind of incorporate all that into it. And then the beauty of this, what you did, I think it really works well, right? So minimally prep.
So it's an ADP technique. So Peter gives me wax up with a matrix, and I prep through the matrix. So it's really minimally invasive. It's just to see exactly how much room you need. But I am increasing his VD slightly because even his posterior teeth have those enamel defects. So we decided to do Van Lace in the posteriors, and molars got composite restorations just to maintain that VD, and that helped me with control over how much of preparations I'm doing.
And I think there's twofold here, right? So just to go back and harness this, we did the orthodontics because that was the right thing to do to save tooth structure, but orthodontics has some bounce back and some movement. And we still wanted to change OVD because we wanted to make sure that not only did we get the lower teeth out of the way, but they stay out of the way, right? So it was a combination of both there to make sure that not only did we move the teeth, but we also did a vertical change. Beautiful preps, as always. And in the end, impression. Why did you go digital, non-digital? Why was it physical?
Back in those days, I didn't have a scanner, but for veneers, I still prefer to take regular impressions because the scan does not really captures the interproximal if the teeth are not broken in between. Maybe if it was a diastema closure and the preparations were more separate, the scanner will pick up that margin a little bit better. But I slightly put a little bit of a strip in between the teeth. I don't break a contact, but I just create a tiny bit of space for the light body to flow in, and it really captures nice because then the contacts are read so well. Like the fit is so much better if I give Peter a lot more information.
Yeah, and I could tell you, even if you were prepping this case today, I wouldn't want anything but a physical impression, right? Especially when you're doing minimally invasive veneers, you've created a nice elbow in there, and you have, a 2 millimeter length of contact from tooth to tooth. Digital scanners are fabulous, and we use them all the time. You have 2 here, right, in the office, but not for veneers. I still feel, especially when they're non-minimally invasive veneers, I still want to go physical impression. So I think that's important to me, physical impression on the upper. And just for time, I'll kind of jump through here. So I treated this with lithium disilicate restorations, and I layer my lithium disilicate. I'm not doing them monolithic. I'm kind of anti-monolithic, especially for veneers, unless they're just 2/3 of a millimeter, where it's just nothing but a staining option there. Upper and lower arches were done, cleaned up, and you can kind of see that you can actually see the preparations right through there. That's the yellow stone kind of popping through. So you can see how thin they are. So that ADP technique really works well for minimally invasive. We did open the vertical, and I believe you did some spot composites on the posterior at the end to manage the vertical.
They needed to be replaced anyway, so that's how I managed the occlusion in the molars.
And then here you are on the day of inserts, so the tissue is still a little kind of puffy there.
I have better pictures. Why didn't you put them in?
I didn't find them last night. It was late last night when I was organizing this. And here's our patient at the end. And I think that's really what matters, right? I always say the eyes don't lie, right? When the patient looks really happy and they can smile and all the things. And funny, remember I pointed out how awkward the lip dynamic was before? Notice it doesn't look as bad now in that big full smile, right? I mean, he still pulls up a little bit more here, but he shows a little more central, and it worked out kind of well. So that's what we do. I think in the end, that's really what we try to do, is manage every case, whether it's full restorative, minimally invasive, implant driven, denture driven. The process is the same for us over and over again. And I think I hope you guys enjoy seeing it this way, because I think it's easy to talk about building a ceramic or a margin or this or that, but I think the interaction with the clinical partners that you work with are really important. I'm lucky that I work with some really great clinicians, and I think it makes it nicer, especially when you're close and you can kind of really evaluate through the patient. So thank you guys for spending some time with myself. And Dr. Mike popped in and out, but he was busy, so he didn't get to say too much. But thank you guys for paying attention. And Paul, if they have any questions, feel free.
So far, it looks like you've answered all of the questions. So if you guys have any final questions, please please put them in that question box, and I will ask them to Peter.
I have a question. What's the weather like in Cali right now?
It's starting to get warm. It's about 70, I think it's going to be 76 or 78 today in Yorba Linda. So,
well, I'm going to be out your way. I'll be in Oregon, Arizona, and then Yorba Linda, and then Orange County. So I hope I see some people at some of the shows or on the West Coast. I'll be out there in 2 weeks.
Yes, please. If anyone is planning to be at Lab Day West, please come out and see us. I will be there. Peter will be there. Please come talk to us. We'd be happy to chat about some of the stuff we talked about today and some of our other products and processes that we've done over this year. Here we go. We've got a couple.
I hope they're all for her.
I don't take questions.
Possibly. Let me see if I understand this one here. As a doctor, do you recommend patients using hydrogen peroxide to whiten?
Some people insist that it's actually working for them. I don't necessarily personally have used it on myself, but yes, studies show that it really does help with whitening. But I prefer something that is a little bit more researched. So in my office, I usually do core.
Okay, thanks. Another one we have here is, do you have any advice to improve the bond of porcelain with zirconia to avoid chipping?
Is that for you? Could she answer that one? I think that's mine. Yes. So for one, years ago, ceramic on zirconia always seemed to be a real issue for porcelain breakage. I don't really see that issue much anymore, and I'll knock on wood not to jinx myself. And the reason I don't see that issue anymore is a few reasons. One, the zirconia design is more critical today. It's kind of like old school metal ceramics, where you have to get more support out of the substructure, you have to design them better. So if the design is weak and you have a lot of unsupported porcelain, it's much easier for it to chip off because it's a very hard substructure and a softer ceramic. So that's one issue. Occlusion is really the biggest issue. And just like that case that we just showed, right, with that lateral, had she not moved that teeth and we did zirconia crowns on him, what would have been the chipping point? That lateral would have started chipping off sooner or later. I'm not a huge fan of making everything monolithic. I would rather layer. And then the third part or fourth part to that is the grab onto the zirconia. So over the years, we've developed different techniques in the firing, slow cooling to get that zirconia to ceramic to grab onto. The heat rate a little bit better, doesn't cause any internal fracturing. So you want to lower a slower cool down on the zirconia material. And probably the last thing I would say is the surface of the zirconia. If you're adjusting the zirconia and grinding on it, especially if you're using diamonds or kind of smoother materials, you're creating more surface tension on it, and any material would want to pull away from it. So sandblasting and creating more surface is better for the mechanical retention of it. I always have long answers. That's my problem.
Excellent. I've got a follow-up question on that. When you're doing a cutback on zirconia, what's your feeling towards doing that incisal edge, full zirconia, and then cut back?
Yeah, so that's probably what everybody's doing today more than anything, right? They're doing a complete lingual zirconia up to the incisal edge and then just layering the facial. The pros and cons of that are you'll get no ceramic breakage most likely because you have zirconia hitting the teeth. The con of that is you have zirconia hitting the other teeth, right? So, and I know studies act like zirconia doesn't wear teeth, and it's all baloney. Zirconia is a very hard material. It wears other teeth. So I don't really want to have lingual zirconia, especially against a very tight envelope of lower teeth, especially on a younger patient if I don't have to. I think the real answer to your question though, Paul, is it's an audible, meaning that there are times I will extend it up a little further because functionally I'm concerned, and there are times where I won't because aesthetically I'm more concerned.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I don't seem to have any other. Oh, here's one more that just popped in. What should be the minimal thickness for zirconia? 3 millimeters, or what is your recommendation?
So from an aesthetic point of view, if I did a lingual zirconia and I had the layer ceramic on the facial, I'm going to go about 0.3, 0.4 tenths of a millimeter most of the time. But if I'm utilizing the zirconia, meaning that I've done a multi-layer zirconia, like I use the multi-layer ST for the VITA one lot. If I use the multi-layer, then maybe I can get away with more thickness on the cervical to the mid-third, and then just cut back more to the incisal. So, but minimally for me, if I was just doing straight copings, I can get away with 3/4 tenths of a millimeter, but that goes against what I just said, meaning that if I had a lot of space, I need more support. Minimally 3/10, fully I could get as much thickness as I want to cover.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all for joining us.
Okay. So if you guys have any questions about the materials or pricing on anything that we talked about today, here are all your local sales reps, and the phone number for the help desk. If you have any more questions on using the materials, you can get a hold of me or Jim here at the help desk, or send us an email and we'll be happy to help that way also. You can also find this and several other webinars on our VITA North America YouTube page. We've got some more stuff coming up. Come see us at Lab Day West. And then here are some of the topics for the upcoming webinars that we've got. And if there's something that you guys want to see or hear about that we don't have on our list here, please reach out and let us know, and we'll be happy to put something together. So thank you again, Peter.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time today.
And thank you for Dr. Bernadette for taking time out and spending time with us. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you in Cali or at the next webinar.
Terrific. Thank you all.
Take care.
Have a good day.
Have a great day.